The weight of the silver tray in Isabella Moretti's hands was a familiar ache, a constant companion to the chronic weariness that settled deep in her bones. Tonight, a Thursday, the air in Il Condor was thick with the scent of white truffles and old money, the golden chandeliers casting a warm, deceptive glow across the vast dining room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, a few rebellious strands escaping around her temples. Her crisp black uniform shirt and pristine white apron were a shield, a uniform that hid the anxieties of a woman in her mid-20s, fighting to keep her head above the churning waters of New York City. She moved with a practiced, almost balletic grace between the tables, her eyes dark and expressive, scanning the room, landing finally on the sprawling corner booth, table number 8. At its head sat Dante Rossi. Even from a distance, his presence was a gravitational force. He leaned back in his plush upholstered chair, a picture of casual power, his tailored black suit unbuttoned just enough to reveal a heavy gold chain resting against the tattooed skin of his chest and neck. His dark hair was slicked back, a few artful strands falling across his forehead, and a smile played on his lips, a smirk that held both predatory amusement and a hint of something colder, sharper. His 7 men, dressed in various shades of expensive dark suits, surrounded him, their gazes like silent sentinels, occasionally glancing at Izzy as she approached, a subtle shift in the air signaling their quiet deference to their boss. This was the man whispered about in hushed tones by the maitre d' and the kitchen staff, the undisputed head of one of the city's most powerful and dangerous Italian-American families. Izzy, or rather Isabella, as she preferred in her rare moments of self-reflection, had delivered the sparkling water and a fresh basket of artisanal bread, her mind already cycling through the evening's Italian specials. She placed the final glass, its crystal clinking softly against the white linen, and began to turn. It was then that Dante Rossi leaned forward, his eyes, suddenly keen and intelligent, locking onto hers. The smirk widened, a glint of challenge in their depths. His voice was a low murmur, but it carried an undeniable resonance, spoken in rapid-fire Neapolitan Italian, a dialect not often heard outside the tight-knit communities of southern Italy or the older enclaves of Brooklyn. The words, a cruel, mocking implication that her understanding of the language, and by extension, her capabilities as a server, was as shallow as her appearance, hit her with a familiar sting. She stood there, hands clasped loosely in front of her, precisely as her training dictated, but inside a quiet storm began to gather. The men around the table chuckled, a low, synchronized sound of shared amusement, their eyes fixed on her, waiting for her reaction. Dante's gaze was a physical weight, daring her to respond, to break her professional composure, to show even a flicker of the indignity she felt. It was a test, a deliberate assertion of dominance designed to amuse his retinue and remind a simple waitress of her place. The pressure in the elegant room intensified, a silent challenge hanging heavy in the air. If you've ever felt that kind of dismissive judgment, that immediate tightening in your chest as someone tries to diminish you, then you know the fire that began to spark in Isabella's gut. If this feeling resonates with you, consider giving us a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us tell more stories like this. But to understand how Isabella Moretti found herself at the precipice of a dangerous new chapter, facing down a powerful man whose world was irrevocably intertwined with her own, we must rewind a few years back to a time before Il Condor, before Dante Rossi, and even before the crushing weight of her father's legacy truly settled upon her shoulders. Isabella, Izzy to her friends, and more recently to the weary part of herself that just needed to survive, had once harbored dreams as vast and glittering as the Manhattan skyline visible from the restaurant's panoramic windows. Dreams of literature, of dissecting prose, of losing herself in the worlds created by others, or perhaps creating her own. But those dreams, once vibrant and demanding, had faded into the background, painted over by the harsh strokes of reality. Her father, Alessandro Moretti, a man she believed to be a simple, honest construction worker, had passed away 3 years prior, leaving behind not just a profound grief, but also a mountain of medical debt that felt insurmountable. It was well over $100,000, a figure that seemed to mock her meager waitress salary. He had been a man of quiet strength, with hands calloused from years of labor and eyes that held a depth she now realized she had never truly understood. His death had ripped a hole in her world, not just emotionally, but financially. Suddenly, Izzy became the sole anchor for her younger sister, Sophia. Sophia, bright and ambitious, was a student at New York University. Her tuition a non-negotiable expense that ate up every spare dollar Izzy earned. Sophia's future, untainted by the shadow of debt and deferred dreams, was the one beacon of hope Izzy clung to. Every late-night shift at Il Condor, every extra hour spent cleaning the restaurant after closing, scrubbing floors until her back ached and her fingers were raw, was for Sophia. Izzy's tiny apartment in a less-than-safe corner of Brooklyn was a constant, stark reminder of the precariousness of her existence. It was a fifth-floor walk-up with peeling paint and radiators that hissed more than they heated. A far cry from the opulent, gilded cages of Manhattan's elite. But it was hers and it was home. She had been raised by her Neapolitan Nonna, a woman of fierce spirit and even fiercer linguistic pride. Nonna Conchetta had immigrated from a small village near Naples in her youth, bringing with her not just recipes and superstitions, but also the rich, rapid-fire cadence of the Neapolitan dialect. From the time Izzy could string sentences together, Nonna had drilled the language into her, insisting it was a birthright, a connection to their heritage that must never be lost. "You speak the language of kings and poets, Tesoro," Nonna would say, pinching Izzy's cheek, "and also of street vendors and rebels. It is the language of life. Never forget it." Izzy had rebelled as a teenager, finding it embarrassing. A relic from an old world that had no place in her modern New York life. She spoke standard Italian fluently, too, a skill honed in high school and college. But Neapolitan was different. It was visceral, a part of her soul, even if she rarely used it. Only with Nonna, and then only grudgingly. After Nonna passed, Izzy had stopped speaking it almost entirely. The words, like a forgotten melody, lay dormant, waiting. The routine of Il Condor was a well-oiled machine, its rhythm dictating Izzy's days. She arrived each afternoon, the scent of fresh pasta and simmering sauces already permeating the air, a stark contrast to the exhaust fumes of the subway. She would don her uniform, pin her hair back, and plaster on the polite, professional smile that hid a multitude of worries. Her colleagues, mostly immigrants and aspiring artists, were a motley crew, bound by the shared camaraderie of low wages and high expectations. They understood, without needing words, the silent struggles each faced. Yet none of them carried the burden Izzy did, the crushing weight of a family's future resting solely on her slender shoulders. Dante Rossi was a name that sent ripples through the staff whenever his reservation was made. The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose normally unflappable demeanor could withstand any New York billionaire's tantrum, became visibly nervous. "Rossi party, table 8. He would announce, his voice a little too tight, his eyes darting around as if expecting shadows to materialize. Tonight, the buzz had been particularly pronounced. A reservation for 8 in the largest, most prominent booth meant a significant event, and when Dante Rossi arrived, he did so with the quiet, unsettling authority of a man who commanded respect without ever asking for it. He walked with a confident stride, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his eyes sweeping the room, assessing, calculating, owning every inch of the space. Izzy had tried to avoid his table, not out of fear exactly, but out of a deep-seated instinct to remain invisible. She knew the type, powerful men who viewed service staff as extensions of the furniture, objects to be used, ignored, or occasionally amused by. She preferred to be ignored. But fate, or perhaps the strategic placement of the maitre d', had other plans. Mr. Henderson had specifically assigned her to the Rossi table, citing her impeccable service record and her fluency in Italian, a skill he believed would be an asset. He didn't know the half of it. As she moved through the room, her tray balanced, her focus narrowed, the sounds of conversation, the clinking of silverware, the soft jazz playing in the background, all faded. Her world was the 20 feet between her and table 8. She approached, her steps even, her breathing controlled. She had rehearsed the menu specials in her head, the precise Italian pronunciation for each dish, ready to deliver them with the detached professionalism expected. She placed the sparkling water, the glasses catching the warm glow of the candles that dotted the table. The bread basket, a small mountain of freshly baked focaccia and grissini, followed. She could feel Dante Rossi's eyes on her even before he spoke. It was a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, a predatory awareness that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She kept her gaze politely lowered, focusing on the task, on the choreography of service. As she straightened, preparing to offer the menu, he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise like a sharpened blade. A high-class waitress. The words hung in the air, a silken whip. It wasn't just the insult, the casual dismissal of her intelligence and capability, but the choice of dialect, Neapolitan. His men chuckled, a low, guttural sound that grated on her nerves. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. He thought he was speaking in code, in a dialect obscure enough to ensure she wouldn't understand, to keep his conversation private, to impress his men with his casual power and knowledge. He was showing off, asserting his territory, and using her as a prop in his little display. She could see it in the arrogant glint of his eyes, the subtle tilt of his head. He had underestimated her, assumed she was just another nameless face, a vessel for food and drink, easily intimidated, easily dismissed. For a split second, the exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, to make her simply nod, offer a generic, "I'll get your menu, sir," and retreat, letting the insult wash over her like so many others. But then a flicker, a spark ignited deep within her, a ghost of Nonna Concetta's fierce pride, a memory of a time before debt, before exhaustion, before dreams were deferred. A lifetime of suppressing her true self, of making herself small, invisible for the sake of survival, suddenly felt unbearable. The words formed on her tongue, precise, sharp, a language he thought was his exclusive domain. She met his gaze, her own dark eyes unwavering. And for the first time in a very long time, Isabella Moretti was not just a waitress. She was a woman about to speak her mind in a language he never expected. Her voice was low, controlled, but the message landed with the force of a perfectly aimed jab. The smiles around the table vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. And even Dante Rossi's smirk faltered, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, suddenly intense, seemed to see her for the very first time, not as a server, but as a woman with a hidden depth that defied his assumptions. Dante Rossi's smirk evaporated, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, a shade of deep hazel, widened, fixed on Isabella with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. The collective snickers of his men died in their throats, replaced by a profound, uncomfortable silence. The air in Il Condor thickened, no longer just with the scent of truffles, but with an unspoken acknowledgement of a boundary crossed, a power dynamic unexpectedly challenged. Isabella held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild, exhilarating beat that echoed the defiant word she had just spoken. For a long, drawn-out moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, Dante Rossi tilted his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile returning to his lips, though this one held no amusement, only a sharp, calculating curiosity. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers, as if he were seeing her, truly seeing her, for the very first time. His men shifted, uneasy, their silent communication a blend of surprise and deference. Izzy felt a tremor run through her, a mix of fear and a strange, potent sense of vindication. She had stood her ground. "Very good, waitress," Dante finally murmured, his voice softer now, almost a purr, the Neapolitan still present, but stripped of its earlier mockery. "Very good." He didn't elaborate, didn't demand an apology, didn't even betray a hint of anger. Instead, he simply gestured to the menu, a silent command for her to proceed with her duties. Isabella, her composure firmly back in place despite the internal turmoil, nodded once, a crisp, professional movement. She distributed the menus, her hands steady, her voice clear as she recited the specials in standard Italian, her earlier defiance now a simmering ember beneath the surface. Throughout the rest of their meal, Dante Rossi watched her. He didn't stare openly, but every time she approached the table, she felt the weight of his gaze, a persistent, unnerving awareness that she was no longer invisible. He observed her as she took orders, as she poured wine, as she cleared plates, as if trying to unravel the mystery of the woman who had dared to speak back. It was not a hostile gaze, but an inquisitive one, like a predator studying a new, fascinating prey. His usual conversations with his men were punctuated by silences, his attention often drawn to her, making the others at the table subtly uncomfortable. By the time the Rossi party finally departed, leaving behind a lavish tip that far exceeded the norm, a silent acknowledgement perhaps of the evening's unexpected entertainment, Izzy felt utterly drained. The confrontation had taken more out of her than a double shift. As the heavy oak doors of Il Condor swung shut behind them, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her colleagues, who had witnessed the exchange from a distance, approached her with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Izzy, what was that?" one whispered, eyes wide. She simply shrugged. A practiced gesture of indifference, just a rude customer. But deep down she knew it was anything but. She had invited something dangerous and unknown, into her carefully compartmentalized life. A strange thrill, a sense of having finally asserted herself, mingled with a creeping dread. What had she done? The next 48 hours passed in a blur of routine and mounting unease. The lingering sensation of Dante Rossi's eyes on her never quite faded. She found herself scanning the streets of Brooklyn more carefully. Her senses heightened, a subtle shift in her perception of the world. Then the first signs appeared. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade, its windows tinted opaque, parked a block from her apartment building. It was there when she left for work in the morning, and there again when she returned late at night. It was too pristine, too out of place for her humble neighborhood. She dismissed it at first, a trick of her overtired mind, a lingering paranoia from the encounter. But the Escalade reappeared day after day. Sometimes a different model, but always black, always menacingly silent, always watching. Her tiny apartment, usually a sanctuary from the city's relentless demands, now felt exposed. She found herself peering through the worn blinds, her heart thumping against her ribs, searching for shadows that weren't there, or perhaps were. The thought that Dante Rossi, a man of such power, could be remotely interested in a struggling waitress was absurd. And yet, the feeling of being observed, of having her private world infiltrated, was undeniably real. She tried to rationalize it, convince herself it was a coincidence, a stranger in a nice car taking a wrong turn. But the consistent presence, the unsettling vigilance chipped away at her logic. Then came the phone call late Friday evening. It was Sophia, her voice bubbling with a mixture of disbelief and frantic joy. "Izzy, you won't believe it. My tuition, it's paid. All of it, for the entire year. And they said it was from an anonymous benefactor. Did you do this, Izzy?" Isabella's blood ran cold. Sophia's tuition, $100,000. A sum that had haunted Isabella's waking and sleeping hours for years, suddenly vanished. Her sister's excitement was infectious, but Izzy could only manage a choked sound of confusion. "No, Sophia, I didn't. Are you sure?" "Who?" The bursar just said anonymous. They wouldn't give any more details. "Oh my God, Izzy, this is a miracle. It's all gone. A miracle or a debt. A gilded cage beginning to take shape." Isabella felt a wave of nausea wash over her. An anonymous benefactor. Felt far too convenient, far too sinister. The black Escalade. The intense gaze of Dante Rossi. The sudden, impossible liberation from a crushing financial burden. It all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a random act of kindness. This was a claim. The very next day, a Saturday, her landlord, a gruff old man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to the restaurant manager, called her. His tone was uncharacteristically polite, almost obsequious. "Miss Moretti, just calling to inform you. Your rent? For the next 12 months it's been paid in full." Another anonymous benefactor. Quite generous, wouldn't you say? The words were a hammer blow. Her rent, her most immediate and constant financial burden, gone. Two impossible burdens lifted within 48 hours of her encounter with Dante Rossi. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a declaration. Her autonomy, her hard-earned independence, the very fabric of her precarious life was being systematically dismantled, replaced by a suffocating, undeniable protection. Later that evening, as the last rays of sunlight bled from the Brooklyn sky, casting long purple shadows down her street, a different car pulled up. Not an Escalade, but a sleek black Mercedes S-Class. The passenger door opened, and out stepped a man Izzy recognized from Dante Rossi's table. Marco. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held no discernible warmth, only an unyielding resolve. He approached her apartment building, his steps slow and deliberate, a silent harbinger of fate. Isabella met him at the bottom of the crumbling steps, her jaw set, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Marco offered no pleasantries. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the elegant setting of Il Condor. "A message from Dante Rossi, Miss Moretti." He extended a small, folded card. It was thick, creamy parchment, edged in gold, impossibly elegant for the message it contained. Izzy opened it, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside, handwritten in a bold, authoritative script, were 3 lines in Italian. Isabella translated them in her mind, the words echoing with chilling finality. "Dante Rossi takes care of what is his, and now you are his. There is no turning back." She crumpled the card in her hand, her knuckles white. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising, a tremor of fury now mixing with the terror. You don't just buy people." Marco's gaze remained impassive. "Dante Rossi is merely ensuring your well-being, Miss Moretti, and that of your sister. Your father's debts were substantial. Your sister's future secured. These are not purchases. They are investments and protection." "Protection from what?" she challenged, her voice tight, the indignation battling with a growing sense of dread. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though she knew he wasn't trying to be discreet. "From the consequences of what you heard, Miss Moretti, and from the consequences of who you are." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We know you overheard the boss." The whisper at dinner, the whisper, that fleeting, almost imperceptible exchange in Neapolitan between Dante and one of his men just moments before he had turned his mocking attention to her. She had dismissed it, a fragment of background noise, but now it surged back with perfect clarity. Dante had spoken of a fragile peace treaty with a rival family, the Gianninis, being jeopardized by a crucial lost ledger. He had lamented its absence, the danger it posed. She had understood every word. Even then, the language flowing through her veins, a part of her she had long suppressed. It had been a careless moment for Dante, a slip into a dialect he assumed no one else present would comprehend, and she had understood. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The mockery hadn't just been about power. It had been a test, a deliberate act to gauge her reaction, her potential, and she had passed it, perhaps in the worst possible way. Her fluency, her forgotten birthright had made her visible, had put her in the crosshairs. I didn't understand anything," she lied, her voice weak. Marco simply smiled, a humorless curve of his lips. "It doesn't matter what you claim to understand, Miss Moretti. Only what we know you heard. The Gianninis are not subtle, and they are not forgiving. Your association with us, however accidental, now makes you a target." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her, assessing. "Dante Rossi values loyalty, and he values what is his. He takes care of his own, but he expects loyalty in return." With that, Marco turned and re-entered the Mercedes. The car pulled away silently, leaving Isabella standing alone in the fading light, the crumpled card still clutched in her hand. Her terror was now absolute, but beneath it, a strange, unnerving sensation bloomed, a flicker of something that felt dangerously close to attraction. This man, this ruthless mob boss, had seen her vulnerabilities, her crushing burdens, and had swept them away with a flick of his wrist. He was a monster, yes, but a monster who offered a terrifying, undeniable security. The world around her, once a struggle for mere survival, was now a dangerous chessboard, and she, a pawn, had just been claimed by the king. Her autonomy was gone, but so was the gnawing anxiety of debt. The lines between protector and captor began to blur. She tried to fight it, to reclaim her old life. She attempted to refuse the paid rent, to demand answers from Sophia about the tuition. But it was too late. The money was in the accounts, irreversible, tied to her and her sister in ways she couldn't wrap her head around it. She wasn't just Isabella Moretti, the struggling waitress, anymore. She was now a woman claimed by Dante Rossi, a chilling realization that resonated with a dangerous, unsettling truth. The following week, the danger lurking beneath the surface turned into a stark, undeniable reality. It was a Tuesday evening, marked by another late shift at Il Condor, followed by her cleaning job. She was walking home through a desolate stretch of Brooklyn, the streetlights flickering above her like hesitant stars in the night sky. Her mind was stuck on repeat, replaying Marco's ominous words, and the image of Dante Rossi's intense, unwavering gaze. Suddenly, the piercing screech of tires shattered the night silence. A dark sedan, moving at an impossible speed, swerved sharply out of an alleyway, hurtling directly towards her. The blinding headlights momentarily robbed her of her vision. She had no time to react, no time to even scream. She froze, a deer caught in the headlights, her entire life flashing before her eyes in a desperate, chaotic montage. Then, a blur of motion erupted. Two figures emerged from the shadows of an adjacent building with breathtaking speed, throwing themselves at her. One of them shoved her violently out of the path of the speeding car, sending her sprawling onto the cracked pavement. The other, impossibly fast, fired a muffled shot from a silenced weapon into the sedan's tires as it roared past, sending it careening wildly into a lamp post with a sickening metallic crash. Adrenaline surged through Izzy's veins, a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror. She lay there, bruised and shaken, her breath coming in ragged gasps, staring at the crumpled remains of the sedan. The two men who had saved her were already moving, their movements fluid and practiced, like shadows dancing in the night. They were Dante's men. She knew it instantly, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones. They pulled her to her feet, their hands firm, but not unkind. "Are you hurt, Miss Moretti?" one of them asked, his voice calm and professional, as if this were a routine rescue mission. She shook her head, unable to speak, her throat tight with fear and shock. The close call, the undeniable reality of the attempt on her life, solidified everything Marco had warned her about. The Gianninis were real. The danger was real. Before she could fully process the terror that had just unfolded, another black Mercedes, this one driven by Marco himself, screeched to a halt beside them. The back door opened, revealing Dante Rossi, his face grim, his eyes burning with an almost feral intensity. He looked at her, then at the crashed car, his jaw tight with barely suppressed rage. "Get her in," he commanded, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. They bundled her into the back seat beside him. The interior of the car was opulent, the leather cool against her skin, a stark and unsettling contrast to the violence she had just witnessed. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming, filling the space with an undeniable power. The car sped away, leaving the wreckage and the quickly gathering wail of sirens behind. "They want you dead," Dante stated, his voice devoid of emotion, delivering the words as a cold, hard fact. "They believe you have information about the ledger, or that I am using you to find it." Isabella swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "The ledger." He turned to her then, his gaze piercing, unwavering. The Giannini Ledger, a document detailing their illicit operations, their connections, their blood debts. A document that could dismantle their entire network, and a document that my family has been searching for decades. He paused, his eyes narrowing, assessing her. Your father, Isabella? Alejandro Moretti, he wasn't just a construction worker. Her father, the honest, hard-working man who had been her rock, her only parent, the man she thought she knew inside and out. Her mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the image with the words she was hearing. He was a bookkeeper, Dante continued, his voice softer now, almost mournful. A trusted man for my grandfather, Silvio Rossi. He was involved, Isabella, deeply involved. He feared for his family, for you and Sofia. After witnessing a brutal betrayal orchestrated by the Gianninis against the Rossis, he secretly copied sections of that ledger. He hid it, hoping to use it as leverage for your protection. But he died before he could act. Isabella stared at him, her world crumbling around her, the foundations of her entire life shattering with each word. Her father, a mob bookkeeper, hidden ledgers, blood debts. The man she had mourned, the source of her current financial despair, was not the man she thought she knew. My pursuit of that ledger, Dante said, his voice dropping to a raw, guttural whisper. And now my absolute claim over you is both about revenge and a twisted sense of familial honor, a debt of protection passed down through generations. I need you to find what your father hid, and I will use every resource to ensure your safety, even if it means holding you captive. He gestured vaguely, indicating the luxurious car, the implied destination. You are safe with me, but you are mine, and there is no turning back. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact that terrifyingly began to make a strange, unsettling sense in the face of the very real danger she had just escaped. The fear of the external threat, of the Gianninis, was so palpable, so immediate, that Dante's obsessive control, his gilded cage, began to morph in her mind from an unbearable prison into a necessary sanctuary. She was trapped, yes, but she was alive. And in a world where her father was a stranger and her life was no longer her own, this dangerous man, this mob boss, was the only one offering any semblance of protection. The Mercedes glided through the streets, a silent, opulent cage, transporting her further and further away from the life she knew. Isabella sat beside Dante, the revelation about her father echoing in her ears like a death knell for her past. Alejandro Moretti, the honest construction worker, the loving father, was a phantom. In his place emerged a man shrouded in secrets, a bookkeeper for the Rossi family, a keeper of dangerous knowledge and the architect of her current terrifying reality. The betrayal stung, sharper than the fear of the Gianninis, because it came from the one person she had trusted implicitly. They didn't stop at her Brooklyn apartment. Instead, the car veered towards Manhattan, accelerating through the night. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and crimson, a glittering backdrop to her unraveling life. Dante spoke little, his gaze fixed on the passing cityscape, his jawline tight. His silence was not comforting, but rather the calm before a storm, a quiet that buzzed with unspoken promises and threats. Izzy, for her part, couldn't have spoken even if she'd wanted to. Her mind was a chaotic swirl of images. Her father's hands, not just calloused from steel beams, but perhaps from ledger books. Nona Concetta's insistent lessons in Neapolitan, now resonating with an unnerving new significance. The mocking smirk of Dante Rossi, now recontextualized as a cruel, yet accidental invitation into his world. They arrived at a towering, anonymous building overlooking Central Park, its facade a seamless expanse of glass and steel. The Mercedes pulled into a subterranean garage, and a private elevator whisked them upwards, bypassing all other floors to a penthouse that spoke of immense, unbridled wealth. It was a sprawling, modern space, minimalist in design, yet radiating an undeniable power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama of the city, an endless tapestry of lights that stretched to the horizon. But Isabella saw only the gilded bars of her new prison. "This is where you will stay," Dante said, his voice cutting through the vast silence of the penthouse. He moved towards the window, his silhouette stark against the urban glow. For your safety, and for the sake of finding what your father hid. Izzy found her voice, tinged with a desperate anger. You can't just keep me here. I have a sister. I have a life. He turned, his eyes piercing. Your sister is safe, Isabella. Safer than she's ever been. Her tuition is paid. Her future secured. Your life, as you knew it, ended the moment you spoke back to me in Neapolitan. It ended the moment the Gianninis realized you might know something, and it certainly ended tonight when they tried to run you down. He took a step towards her, his presence utterly dominant. You are under my protection now. That is not a request. It is a necessity. He laid out the terms with chilling precision. She was free to move within the penthouse, which was staffed by a skeletal crew of silent, efficient personnel. She would have anything she needed, anything she desired, within the confines of these walls. But she would not leave. Not until the ledger was found, and not until the Gianninis were neutralized. Her phone had already been replaced with a secure, encrypted device capable of reaching Sophia, but monitored. Her access to the outside world was filtered, controlled. The initial days were a blur of bewildered grief and furious indignation. Isabella paced the lavish apartment, feeling like a trapped animal. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculated efficiency with which Dante Rossi had dismantled her life and rebuilt it around his will, was infuriating. She tried to rebel, refusing meals, demanding to be let go, but her defiance met only with impassive silence from the staff and a patient, unyielding resolve from Dante whenever he appeared. He would visit her, usually in the evenings after conducting his shadowy business. He wouldn't apologize, wouldn't try to placate her. Instead, he would simply talk. Sometimes about the city, sometimes about his business, sometimes about the history of the Rossi family, a tapestry of power, loyalty, and ruthless ambition. He seemed to want her to understand, not just his world, but her place in it. He spoke of honor, of debts, of the unforgiving nature of their world. And slowly, insidiously, a part of her began to listen, began to understand. He told her about her father, Aleandro, not the construction worker, but the young, bright man who had come from Naples, a distant relative of the Morettis, a family with deep, if tangential, ties to the old country's families. Aleandro had been brilliant with numbers, an anomaly in a family of fishermen and small-time tradesmen. Silvio Rossi, Dante's grandfather, had seen that talent, had plucked him from obscurity, and brought him into the family's inner circle as a bookkeeper. He had been indispensable, meticulously tracking the complex finances of an empire built on both legitimate and illicit enterprises. Your father was loyal, Dante recounted one evening, standing by the vast window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was a good man, Isabella. Too good for this life, perhaps. But once you're in, you're in. There's no leaving. Not truly. He described the betrayal, the ruthless double-cross by the Gianninis that had nearly decimated the Rossi family's holdings decades ago. Aleandro, a silent witness to the carnage, had seen Silvio Rossi's son, Dante's own father, murdered in cold blood. The Gianninis had stolen their ledger, a document that could prove their dominance, reveal their connections to corrupt officials, and expose their most lucrative operations. Aleandro, fearing for his own young family, for Isabella, then a small child, and for the infant Sophia, had secretly copied sections of that ledger. He hadn't known exactly what to do with it, Dante explained, only that it was a potent weapon, a desperate measure of protection for his daughters if the Rossis fell. He had hidden it, hoping it would never be needed. But it was. And now that hidden knowledge had resurfaced, dragging Isabella into a world she never knew existed. My father died believing he had protected you, Dante said, his voice tinged with a bitterness that cut through his usual composure. He died with that secret, and now that secret has made you a target. The Gianninis are looking for that ledger. They know it exists, and they believe anyone connected to the Morettis might know where it is. They tried to kill you, Isabella. They will try again. The external danger, very real and very close, began to legitimize his obsessive control in her mind. The fear, The immediate visceral terror of the hit and run dulled the sharp edges of her indignation. She was trapped, yes, but protected. The opulence of the penthouse, once a symbol of her captivity, slowly began to feel like a fortress. She oscillated between terror and an unnerving, almost illicit attraction to the man who saw her, truly saw her, when no one else had. He saw not just the waitress, not just the indebted daughter, but the woman with hidden depths, with a dangerous knowledge, with a shared tragic history. Her days settled into an uneasy rhythm. She would read, devour books from Dante's extensive library, a stark reminder of her deferred literary dreams. She would call Sophia, her conversations carefully curated to avoid any mention of her new, luxurious prison. She learned to navigate the penthouse, the silent staff, the brooding presence of Dante Rossi. He wasn't overtly cruel, but his control was absolute. He bought her clothes, expensive, elegant gowns that she wore with a strange detachment, as if they belonged to someone else. He ensured her comfort, her safety, her every material need. He had, in essence, bought her a life. One evening, after nearly 2 weeks of her luxurious confinement, Dante entered her private sitting room, a room filled with books and a grand piano that remained untouched. He carried an old, leather-bound Italian-English dictionary, its cover worn, the gold lettering faded. Her heart leaped to her throat. It was her father's. She remembered it from her childhood, a heavy, dusty tome that sat on his bedside table. "I found this among your father's belongings," Dante said, his voice softer than usual, a hint of something complex in his eyes. He handed it to her. Isabella took it, her fingers tracing the familiar indentations on the leather. The smell of old paper and her father's faint, long-gone scent wafted from its pages. She opened it, and tucked within its worn pages, between the entries for anima and amore, was a faded photograph. Her breath caught. It was her father, much younger, his hair dark and unruly, a genuine, joyful smile on his face, and standing beside him, his arms slung casually around his shoulders, was a youthful Dante Rossi. Both were smiling, their faces unburdened, at what looked like a family picnic. Sunlight streamed through the leaves of a tree, dappling their faces. The image was a stark contrast to the grim reality of their present, a painful echo of a shared past she had never known. Her father, the mob bookkeeper. Dante, the boy he had sworn to protect. The accidental encounter in Il Condor no longer felt accidental. It felt predestined, a cruel twist of fate that had always been simmering beneath the surface of her life. Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. "My father was murdered just a few months before this photo was taken," he said, his voice low, raw with a pain that surprised her. "Aleandro kept me grounded. He was like an uncle to me after my father died. He knew what my family meant to me, what I stood to lose." Isabella felt a wave of empathy, a sudden, unexpected connection to this man, this mob boss, whose own childhood had been shattered by the same violence that now threatened her. The ruthless exterior cracked, revealing a glimpse of the traumatized boy her father had protected. She looked down at the dictionary, remembering how her father would sometimes sit for hours, poring over its pages, making cryptic notes. She turned a few more pages, her fingers brushing against annotations in her father's familiar hand. Not just definitions, but short phrases, coded references to old Neapolitan proverbs, specific locations in their old Brooklyn neighborhood, tucked into the margins of obscure words. "The sparrow guards its nest at the old willow," one read, scribbled next to the word for refuge. "The heart of the market hides its truest gems." Another, "by secret." Dante leaned over her shoulder, his proximity a warm, disconcerting presence. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharp with renewed interest. "My father," she whispered, her mind racing. "He used to do this. He loved proverbs and riddles." She began to piece them together, the scattered clues forming a coherent path. The old willow, a massive tree that had stood for generations in a small park near their childhood home. The heart of the market, referring to the bustling Italian market downtown. near a specific, long-forgotten bank where her Nana used to keep her meager savings. The trail led to a long-forgotten safe deposit box in a downtown Manhattan bank, a place she hadn't thought of in years. It was a small, obscure branch, tucked away on a side street, easily overlooked. "I think I know where it is," Isabella said, her voice filled with a strange, nervous energy, a mix of apprehension and exhilaration. Dante's eyes gleamed, a predatory light returning to them. "Then we go," he said, his voice decisive. That night, the plan was meticulously crafted. Marco and 2 other men would accompany them, a silent, efficient security detail. They would move under the cloak of darkness, a carefully orchestrated operation to retrieve the ledger sections. As they prepared to leave the penthouse, a secure line buzzed. Marco answered, his face darkening. "Boss," he said, his voice tense. "Giannini, they've launched an assault. One of our secondary warehouses in Midtown. They think you and the Moretti woman are there. It's a full-scale attack." Dante's eyes flashed with cold fury. "They're desperate. They're making a move. They're trying to draw us out." He looked at Isabella, his gaze unwavering. "We still go. This ledger is our best defense. It's what they want. If we get it, we can hit them where it hurts." The urgency intensified, the stakes soaring to dizzying heights. They left the penthouse, a somber procession, the city lights below now seeming less like a beautiful tapestry and more like a battleground. They moved through the city in an armored vehicle, the tension inside thick enough to cut with a knife. Isabella felt a strange calm settle over her. She had been thrust into this world, kidnapped, manipulated, but now she was actively participating, driven by the desire to understand her father's legacy and by the primal need for survival. They arrived at the bank branch, a modest, unassuming building. Just as the first reports of heavy gunfire and sirens began to filter through Marco's secure communication device, the Giannini's assault was escalating. This wasn't just about a ledger anymore. It was war. Inside the bank, the vault manager, a nervous elderly man, was quickly persuaded to open the safe deposit box. Isabella, her hands shaking slightly, inserted the key she had found, guided by her father's cryptic clues. The box slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, nestled amongst faded legal documents and a few yellowed family photos, were several thick, leather-bound notebooks, the Giannini ledger. But there was more. Tucked beneath the ledgers was a thick envelope, her father's handwriting, clear and elegant, addressed to her. "My dearest Isabella." Just as her fingers closed around the envelope, the sounds of battle erupted outside. The distant sirens grew louder, closer. Explosions rocked the building. The Gianninis, realizing Dante wasn't at the warehouse, had figured out his next move. They were coming for the ledger and for her. "They're here," Marco yelled, drawing his weapon, his voice grim. Gunfire erupted. Glass shattered. The lobby of the bank was plunged into chaos. Dante, without hesitation, pushed Isabella behind a heavy marble pillar, shielding her with his own body. He drew a sleek, black handgun, his movements swift and practiced, utterly lethal. He was no longer the composed mob boss. He was a warrior protecting what was his. Amidst the chaos, the deafening roar of gunfire, the screams, Isabella clutched the ledger and her father's letter. She watched as Dante fought, a blur of controlled violence, his eyes narrowed, focused, utterly fearless. He moved with a brutal efficiency that both terrified and captivated her. He was fighting for her, for his family's honor, for the legacy her father had left behind. A figure emerged from the smoke and shattered glass, a hulking man with a sneering face, Leo Giannini himself. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Isabella. "The ledger is ours, Rossi," Giannini roared. "And the Moretti dies." Dante, seeing the threat, threw himself in front of her. The shot rang out, impossibly loud, a sickening thud. Dante staggered, a grimace of pain twisting his features. He had taken a bullet for her, a bullet meant for Isabella. In that moment of shared vulnerability amidst the chaos and gunfire, the ruthlessness of the mob boss vanished. She saw past the tattoos, past the gold chain, past the casual power. She saw the traumatized boy her father had sworn to protect, the man burdened by a legacy of violence and loss. She saw his fierce loyalty, his desperate need to protect. And in that terrifying, exhilarating instant, amidst the smell of gunpowder and blood, Isabella Moretti understood the depth of his unspoken pain and the profound, dangerous connection that bound them together. The Gianninis were systematically dismantled, their forces overwhelmed by Dante's men, the tide of the battle turning decisively. But all Izzy could focus on was Dante, bleeding, but alive, his hand reaching out for hers, a silent, profound offer of belonging. The chaos of the bank lobby slowly subsided, replaced by the acrid smell of gunpowder and the groans of the wounded. Dante lay against the marble pillar, his breath ragged, a dark stain spreading across the shoulder of his tailored suit. Isabella, still clutching her father's ledger and the unopened letter, knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound, trying to staunch the flow of blood. His eyes, though clouded with pain, held hers, a silent testament to the raw, visceral connection forged in that brutal moment. Marco, his face grim, was already barking orders into his comms, directing his men to secure the perimeter, to round up the surviving Gianninis, to manage the escalating emergency response. Sirens wailed closer, a discordant symphony of a city roused from its slumber by violence. Yet, in the immediate vicinity of Dante and Isabella, there was a strange, suspended quietude, broken only by Dante's labored breathing and the thumping of Isabella's own terrified heart. "You're bleeding?" she whispered, her voice thick with a mix of fear and an emotion she couldn't yet name, gratitude, perhaps, or a burgeoning sense of profound responsibility. Dante managed a weak smile, a flicker of his usual arrogance, but softened by pain. "It takes more than a Giannini bullet to put down a Rossi." His hand, warm and strong, found hers, squeezing it gently. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "No, because of you." The medics arrived swiftly, a whirlwind of organized chaos. They worked with practiced efficiency, cutting away Dante's suit jacket, applying pressure to the wound, stabilizing him. Isabella was gently but firmly moved aside, the ledger and letter still clutched tightly to her chest. She watched, a silent observer, as Dante was carefully loaded onto a stretcher. Even in pain, his eyes found hers, a silent reassurance, a promise. "Get her back to the penthouse," Dante instructed Marco, his voice strained but clear. "Secure her and the ledger." Marco nodded, his gaze unwavering. "As you command, boss." Isabella was whisked away, not to a hospital, but back to the gilded cage that now felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. The ride was silent, the events of the night replaying in her mind like a brutal, fast-forwarded film. Her father's betrayal, Dante's protection, the attempted hit and run, the raw, terrifying battle in the bank lobby, the gunshot, Dante shielding her. It was a maelstrom of emotions, completely shattering her old way of looking at the world and her place in it. Back in the penthouse, the silence was deafening, like a physical weight pressing down on her. The staff, as always, were discreet and efficient, preparing a guest room for her that now felt strangely and unexpectedly welcoming, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just experienced. She sat on the edge of the bed, the Giannini ledger feeling heavy and substantial in her lap, her father's letter clutched tightly in her hand, the paper crinkling softly with each nervous movement. She had to know the truth. She had to understand the secrets that had been kept from her for so long. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope with a sharp ripping sound. The paper inside was brittle and thin, feeling fragile to the touch. The ink was slightly faded, a testament to the passage of time, but her father's elegant script was unmistakable, each loop and curve familiar and comforting even in this moment of turmoil. "My dearest Isabella," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then the worst has come to pass, and my greatest fear has materialized into reality. I have failed to keep you truly safe, and for that, I will carry an eternal regret, a weight on my soul that I can never fully shed. I know you believe me to be a simple man, just a construction worker living a modest life. And I nurtured that illusion with all my heart, trying to protect you from a world you didn't know existed. I wanted a life for you and Sophia that was untainted by the shadows that consumed mine. A life filled with sunshine and free from the darkness I lived in. But the truth, my daughter, is far more complex and far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. A tangled web of secrets and betrayals. I wasn't just a bookkeeper for Silvio Rossi, Dante's grandfather. I was a trusted confidant, a silent witness to a world most people only see in movies, a world of power and influence hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life. I saw the power, the unwavering loyalty, but I also saw the brutality, the cold, calculated violence that ruled their world. When Dante's father was murdered by the Janninus in an act of shocking treachery, I was there, a helpless observer forced to watch the tragedy unfold before my very eyes. I witnessed it. It was an act of cold-blooded treachery orchestrated to seize power and territory, a ruthless grab for control that shattered the lives of so many. Silvio Rossi, a man of profound honor despite his business dealings, was completely shattered by the loss of his son. In the aftermath of that terrible event, I vowed to him and to myself that I would protect young Dante with every fiber of my being. He was just a boy, barely more than a child, who had lost everything he held dear. He carried a weight no child should ever have to bear, the burden of grief and the thirst for revenge. I saw the fire in his eyes, the deep pain, and the fierce resolve that would one day make him the powerful man he is now. I couldn't save his father, but I could, I hoped, save his future, guide him away from the darkness that threatened to consume him. The Janninus, in their arrogance and short-sightedness, stole Silvio's ledger, believing they had crippled him and dealt a fatal blow to his operations. But what they didn't know, what only a few of us knew, was that I had secretly copied key sections of their own ledger, details of their illicit operations, their hidden connections, their deep-seated corruption, and the blood debt that tied our families together generations deep, a tangled history of violence and betrayal. I hid it away, not out of malice or revenge, but as a last resort, a desperate measure to protect you and Sophia from the dangers I knew all too well. If the tides of this world ever turned against the Rossis, or if the Janninus ever came looking for what they thought I knew, I chose to keep you ignorant of this life, to shield you from the darkness that could easily engulf you. Perhaps it was a mistake, a miscalculation on my part. Perhaps it was cowardice, a failure to trust in your strength. But my love for you was my guiding star, the unwavering light that steered me through the darkness. I prayed this secret would die with me, that you would never have to know the truth. But destiny, it seems, has a cruel sense of irony, a way of twisting our best intentions into something unexpected and often painful. Dante Rossi is a dangerous man. Isabella, there's no denying that. But he is also a man of honor, forged in the crucible of fire and loss. He carries the weight of his family just as I carried the weight of ours, the responsibility of protecting those he loves. He will protect what is his, that much I know to be true. And now, my daughter, he sees you as his, as someone he is bound to protect. Trust him, not blindly, but with the wisdom I know you possess, the intelligence and intuition that have always guided you. Understand his world, for you are now inextricably linked to it, whether you like it or not. The path ahead will be perilous, filled with danger and uncertainty, but you are stronger than you know, more resilient than you give yourself credit for. You are a Moretti with the heart of Naples in your veins, a fierce spirit that cannot be easily broken. Use your mind, your wit, your strength. Find your place, Isabella, for your sake and for Sophia's future. Forgive me, my daughter. Forgive me for the secrets I kept hidden, for the life I unknowingly laid out for you, a path you never asked to walk. Live, Isabella. Thrive, and remember that I loved you always, with every fiber of my being. Your father, Alejandro Moretti. The letter slipped from her numb fingers, landing softly on the rich carpet with a barely audible whisper. Her perception of her father, of her entire life, lay shattered around her like the glass in the bank lobby, fragmented and irreparable. He wasn't a simple, honest man as she had always believed. He was a silent warrior, a man of profound secrets and even profounder love who had sacrificed his own peace of mind to protect his daughters from a world he knew intimately, a world of shadows and danger. The accidental connection with Dante wasn't accidental at all. It was a carefully orchestrated fate. It was a predestined, heartbreaking legacy, a debt of protection passed down through generations, a burden she now had to carry. Isabella picked up the Giannini ledger, the leather binding feeling rough against her skin. Its pages were filled with names, dates, figures, and coded transactions, an indecipherable mess that spoke of an intricate web of corruption, money laundering, drug trafficking, and ruthless violence. Her linguistic skills, once merely a parlor trick she had learned from her nana, now felt like a potent weapon, a tool she could use to fight back against the darkness. She understood the nuance, the coded phrases, the subtle implications of the Neapolitan dialect used within its pages. She could decipher this. She could help Dante, and in doing so, perhaps finally understand her father's world. Hours later, Marco appeared, his presence a quiet interruption to her solitary vigil. His dark eyes were pools of concern. Boss is stable. Lost a lot of blood, but he'll recover. He wants to see the ledger. Isabella nodded, gathering her thoughts and composing her emotions. The tears were gone, replaced by a steely resolve, a newfound determination that hardened her gaze. She followed Marco to Dante's private suite, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. He lay propped up in an enormous bed, pale and drawn, but his eyes were sharp and focused, radiating an intensity that belied his weakened state. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, leaving a deep, painful wound, but thankfully it wasn't life-threatening. A private doctor was attending to him, his movements efficient and discreet. "Isabella?" Dante murmured, his voice weak but still commanding. "The ledger." She walked to his bedside, placing the heavy notebooks on the pristine white duvet. "It's here, and I read my father's letter." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the internal tempest that raged within her. "I understand now." He studied her intently, his gaze unwavering, searching for any sign of weakness or perhaps of newfound strength. He found the latter, a flicker of determination in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. The fear was still there, she knew, but it was tempered by something else, something resilient and fierce. "You understand what?" Dante asked, his eyes challenging her, pushing her to articulate the truth. "Everything," she replied without hesitation. "My father, his loyalty, your family's debt to him, your debt to me, your purpose and mine." She laid her hand on the ledger, her fingers tracing the worn leather. "I can help you decipher this. My nonna taught me Neapolitan. My father used a lot of proverbs and specific idioms in his notes. I think I can piece it together. I can help you dismantle the Gianninis." A flicker of surprise, then a slow, knowing smile spread across Dante's face. It was not the mocking smirk from Il Condor, but a genuine, albeit dangerous, expression of admiration. "I knew there was more to you than met the eye, Bella," he said, his voice laced with a hint of amusement. Meanwhile, as Isabella was making her choice, Leo Giannini was making his last desperate stand, clinging to power with everything he had. The assault on Dante's Midtown warehouse had been a strategic diversion, a clumsy attempt to draw him out and weaken his defenses. But Dante's men, anticipating a trap, had already fortified the location, turning it into a kill zone, a deadly gauntlet for any who dared to enter. What Giannini thought would be a swift, decisive strike to reclaim the ledger and assert his dominance quickly devolved into a brutal, bloody climax, a chaotic and desperate fight for survival. The warehouse became a scene of intense close-quarters combat, a cacophony of gunfire and explosions echoing through the night. Leo Giannini, a man consumed by ambition and a pathological hatred for the Rossi family, fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his desperation fueling his rage. But he was outmaneuvered, his forces decimated by Dante's superior tactics and unwavering loyalty. The warehouse battle, a symphony of gunfire, explosions and shattering glass, was a definitive turning point, the beginning of the end for the Giannini family. The Giannini Empire, already weakened by internal strife and the Rossi's relentless pressure, crumbled under the weight of this final devastating assault, its foundations shaken beyond repair. Dante's men, led by Marco, returned triumphant, their faces grim but victorious, etched with the weariness of battle. They brought news of Leo Giannini's neutralization, his organization decimated, his network of corruption exposed for all to see. The battle was over. The external danger represented by the Gianninis was brutally and definitively eliminated, their reign of terror brought to an end. The ensuing days were a flurry of activity, a whirlwind of investigations and arrests. The ledger, with Isabella's invaluable insights, became the key to unraveling the Giannini's network, exposing their secrets and dismantling their operations. Names, dates, secret accounts, compromised officials. It all came pouring out, a flood of information that overwhelmed the city's underworld. A cascade of arrests, investigations, and power shifts within the city's underworld followed, reshaping the landscape of organized crime. The Gianninis were not just defeated, they were erased from the map, their influence and power completely extinguished. Isabella Moretti, the invisible waitress, was gone, forever transformed by the events of the past few weeks. In her place emerged a woman transformed not just by circumstance, but by an active, conscious choice, a deliberate embrace of her new reality. She didn't return to waiting tables or her small Brooklyn apartment. Her old life, with its dreams of literature and its crushing burdens, was now a distant memory, a faded photograph from a life she no longer recognized. She was now an integral part of Dante Rossi's world, his consort, his confidant, his strategic partner, a vital member of his inner circle. She immersed herself in his empire, using her sharp intellect and unexpected courage to decipher new ledgers, to understand the intricate power plays, to navigate the treacherous currents of their new reality. Her hidden talent for languages, once a source of amusement, became an asset, a tool to forge alliances, and to understand his enemies, gaining valuable insights into their motivations and strategies. She knew the danger of this life, the moral ambiguities, the constant threat that lingered like a shadow, always present, always looming. But she also knew the fierce, unwavering protection of Dante, the man who had claimed her, who had taken a bullet for her, who saw her strength and honored her father's unspoken debt. Their union was forged in fire and blood, a complex tapestry of gratitude, desire, and a shared history that ran deeper than she could have ever imagined, binding them together in ways she was only beginning to understand. She was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a queen in a dangerous game, chosen not by fate alone, but by a powerful man who refused to let her disappear again, and by her own will to embrace a perilous but profoundly real belonging, a sense of purpose and connection she had never known before. The weeks following the Giannini's demise transformed Isabella's life from a turbulent current into a roaring river, sweeping her deeper into Dante Rossi's world, carrying her further away from the life she once knew. The penthouse, once a luxurious cage, now felt like the command center of a vast, intricate empire, a place where decisions were made that shaped the city's underworld. Dante, recovering swiftly from his shoulder wound with a grim determination, wasted no time consolidating his power, and in doing so integrated Isabella fully into his operations, making her an indispensable part of his organization. Her days were no longer defined by the clatter of plates or the exhaustion of late-night cleaning. Instead, she rose with the sun, the expansive city views from the penthouse windows serving as her new horizon, a constant reminder of the power and influence she now possessed. She spent hours in Dante's study, a room filled with rich mahogany, leather-bound books, and humming computer screens, poring over documents, financial statements, and coded communications, absorbing the intricacies of his world. Her linguistic prowess, once a mere academic interest, now became her primary weapon, her most valuable asset. She delved into old ledgers, tracing intricate money trails across continents, deciphering cryptic notes in various dialects, uncovering vulnerabilities and opportunities in Dante's sprawling network, providing him with the information he needed to stay ahead of his rivals. Dante observed her with a quiet satisfaction, a possessive glint in his eyes, admiring her intelligence and her unwavering dedication. He introduced her to his lieutenants, not as a decorative consort, but as a vital asset, a key member of his team. Marco, always the stoic, treated her with a newfound respect, a silent acknowledgement of her intelligence and courage, recognizing the value she brought to the organization. Other capos, initially wary or dismissive, quickly learned that Isabella Moretti was not to be underestimated, that she was a force to be reckoned with. Her sharp intellect, her ability to cut through pretense, and her surprising command of various Italian dialects earned her a grudging, then genuine admiration, proving her worth to even the most skeptical members of Dante's inner circle. She didn't merely process information, she analyzed it, drawing connections Dante himself sometimes missed, providing him with fresh perspectives and insights. Her perspective, unburdened by years of immersion in the underworld's rigid traditions, offered fresh insights, allowing her to see things from a different angle. She questioned, she challenged, and Dante, to his men's astonishment, listened intently, valuing her opinions and insights. He valued her clear-eyed logic, her ability to see the chessboard from a different angle, anticipating her opponent's moves. He saw in her not just a tool, but a partner, a mind capable of navigating the labyrinthine complexities of his world. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside the study window, Isabella sat opposite Dante, a stack of freshly translated documents between them. He had been explaining a complex negotiation for a new port contract, detailing the rival factions, the political maneuvering, the subtle threats embedded in casual conversations, painting a vivid picture of the power struggles at play. "They're playing a long game," Isabella remarked, tapping a finger on a translated communiqué from a rival family in Miami. These phrases, "the tide turns slowly, but inevitably," "the coral builds grain by grain," they're not just poetic, they're signaling a gradual systemic encroachment. They're not looking for a quick kill, they're looking to absorb, to slowly take over. Dante leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips, clearly impressed by her insight. Most would dismiss that as flowery language, as nothing more than empty words. "You see the warning? It's how my Nana spoke," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her own lips, remembering her grandmother's wisdom. Every proverb had a double meaning, a lesson hidden beneath the surface, a way of conveying important information without being explicit. "My father, too, in his notes," she continued. "He encoded truths in everyday phrases, hiding important clues in plain sight." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "He was a brilliant man, Dante. Not just with numbers, but with language, with the art of communication. He was warning you in his own way." A shadow crossed Dante's face, a momentary glimpse of pain, a reminder of the sacrifices her father had made. "He was, and he paid the price for his loyalty, a price I am determined you won't," he said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. Their conversations often drifted to her father, Alessandro. Dante spoke of him with a rare tenderness, recalling moments from his own youth when Alessandro had been a steady, reassuring presence after his father's murder, a source of comfort in a time of immense grief. He shared stories of Alessandro's quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, even amidst the moral ambiguities of the Rossi Empire, painting a portrait of a man who had remained true to himself despite the darkness that surrounded him. These tales slowly pieced together painted a more complete portrait of her father, transforming him from a shadowy figure of secrets into a complex man who had chosen a dangerous path out of love and loyalty, motivated by a desire to protect those he cared about. It helped Isabella reconcile the father she knew with the man Dante described, slowly healing the wound of his unspoken past, coming to terms with the choices he had made. Her sister Sophia continued her studies at NYU, blissfully unaware of the true nature of their benefactor, shielded from the dangers that now consumed Isabella's life. Isabella maintained contact, carefully crafting her conversations, explaining her extended absence as a demanding new job that required her to live closer to Manhattan, offering a plausible explanation for her changed circumstances. Sophia, ambitious and focused on her studies, accepted the explanation without question, thrilled by the unexpected financial freedom that allowed her to pursue her dreams without the crippling burden of debt, grateful for the opportunity to focus on her education. The calls were bittersweet for Isabella, a reminder of the innocent life she had left behind. A life Sophia still enjoyed thanks to Dante's protection. A constant reminder of the sacrifices she had made. The fear, while still a constant undercurrent, had transformed. It was no longer a paralyzing terror, but a heightened awareness, a sharpened instinct for survival, a constant vigilance that kept her on edge. She learned to read the subtle cues of Dante's world, the shifts in his men's demeanors, the unspoken tensions in a room, the double meanings in seemingly innocuous conversations, developing a keen sense of observation. She learned to carry herself with a quiet authority, a reflection of the power she now wielded, not directly, but through her proximity to Dante, projecting an aura of confidence and control. Her physical appearance, too, had changed dramatically. The weary waitress was gone, replaced by a confident and sophisticated woman. In her place was a woman who wore expensive clothes with an innate elegance, whose dark hair, still pulled back, now held a lustrous sheen, whose eyes, though still carrying the weight of experience, sparkled with a newfound confidence and intelligence, reflecting her inner transformation. She spent her days surrounded by luxury, but it was a luxury she had earned. A luxury she now understood was a shield as much as it was a reward, protecting her from the harsh realities of her new life. One afternoon, Dante took her to a private art gallery tucked away in an exclusive corner of the Upper East Side. The walls were adorned with modern Italian masterpieces, a stark contrast to the old-world opulence of Il Condor, providing a glimpse into a different side of his world. "My grandfather bought that," he said, gesturing towards a vibrant, abstract piece, his voice low and reflective. He loved art. He believed it was the true measure of a man's soul, what he chose to leave behind, what he valued and cherished. He turned to her, a rare vulnerability in his gaze, a glimpse into the man beneath the hardened exterior. He also believed in legacies, Isabella. What we inherit, what we build, what we protect, the impact we have on the world. Isabella looked at the painting, then at Dante, searching for the answers to unspoken questions. "And what about you?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want to leave behind?" He paused, a long, thoughtful silence hanging in the air as he considered her question. "Survival," he finally said, his voice firm, "and something stronger than what I inherited. A legacy of order, of respect, even in this world, a sense of justice amidst the chaos." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek in a tender gesture. "And you, Isabella, are now a part of that legacy," he added, his eyes locking with hers. His touch sent a shiver down her spine, a complex mixture of fear, desire, and a bewildering sense of belonging, an acknowledgement of the powerful connection between them. The initial, almost illicit attraction she felt for him had deepened, evolving into something more profound, more unsettling, a complicated blend of emotions she struggled to understand. She was drawn to his strength, his intelligence, his fierce protectiveness, the qualities that made him the man he was. She hated the violence, the ruthlessness of his world, but she couldn't deny the powerful magnetic pull of the man himself, the undeniable chemistry between them. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, and instead of exploiting it, he had offered her an unexpected, dangerous refuge, a place where she could be safe and protected. He had claimed her, yes, but he had also empowered her, giving her a voice and a purpose. Their relationship was unconventional, a dance between captor and protector, intellectual partners, and something far more intimate, a bond forged in shared experiences. There were no grand declarations, no overt romantic gestures in the traditional sense. Their intimacy was forged in shared secrets, in whispered conversations late into the night over encrypted documents, in the silent understanding that passed between them when facing down a new threat, a connection that transcended words. He had taught her to trust her instincts, to anticipate danger, to strategize, honing her natural abilities. She in turn had opened a window into a different kind of strength, a resilience forged not in violence, but in intellect and quiet defiance, showing him the power of words and knowledge. The external threats to Dante's empire were constant, but the Giannini's demise had sent a clear message to the other families, a stark warning of the consequences of crossing the Rossis. Other families, seeing the decisive brutality of the Rossis, treaded more carefully, hesitant to challenge their power. Isabella helped Dante anticipate these challenges, using her analytical skills to identify potential weaknesses, to decipher the nuanced language of their rivals, giving him a crucial advantage. She became his shadow, his whisper, his most trusted advisor, the person he relied on most. One evening, Marco entered the study, his face grave, disrupting the quiet atmosphere. "Boss, there's a new report from our contacts in Palermo. Leo Giannini's cousin, Antonio, he's making moves, gathering the remnants of their organization, trying to rally support," he reported, his voice low and serious. "He's blaming us directly for Leo's downfall, seeking revenge for his cousin's death." Dante's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. A flea trying to bite an elephant. "He won't last, he's no match for us." "He's been making inquiries, boss," Marco continued, his gaze flicking to Isabella, a hint of concern in his eyes. "About Miss Moretti. He believes she has some information, something about a key from her father. He thinks she still holds a piece of the puzzle, that she knows something we don't." Isabella felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, a wave of fear washing over her. A key? She hadn't found any key beyond the one to the safe deposit box. Had her father hidden something else? A secret she was unaware of? Dante turned to her, his eyes narrowed, searching for answers. "Did your father leave you anything else, Isabella? A physical key? A clue in his letter we missed?" She shook her head, racking her brain, trying to recall any detail that might be relevant. "No, just the dictionary, the safe deposit box key, and the ledger. And his letter, nothing else." She replayed every word of his letter in her mind, every phrase, searching for a hidden meaning, a subtle clue she had overlooked. He wrote, "The sparrow guards its nest at the old willow, and the heart of the market hides its truest gems. We found the ledger from those. But then, the language of life holds the key to the future. I thought it was poetic, about Neapolitan, about the importance of language. But what if it's literal? What if it's not just a metaphor?" Dante looked at her, his mind already racing, piecing together the fragments of information. A key? A physical key? Where would he hide it that only you could find it, somewhere you would recognize? Something connected to the language of life, a place where language was central? Isabella's eyes widened, a sudden flash of insight illuminating her face, a realization dawning on her. "My Nana," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "Her old apartment, the one she passed down to us, the one I grew up in before we moved to Brooklyn, before my father got sick. There was an old wooden chest. She called it her language chest, her treasure trove of words. It was filled with old Neapolitan books, poems, dictionaries, and at the bottom there was a loose panel, a hidden compartment. She always told me it was her secret box for words, a place where she kept her most precious linguistic treasures. My father would visit her there even after she moved in with us, spending hours talking and laughing." Dante stood, his decision made without hesitation. "We go to the old apartment immediately. If Antonio Giannini is looking for a key, it's because he believes it leads to something else crucial, something that could threaten us even further, a weapon he can use against us." The full weight of their entwined destinies crashed upon Isabella, the realization of the danger they faced settling heavily on her shoulders. Her father's intricate web of secrets continued to unravel, each revelation pulling her deeper into a life she could never have imagined, a world of violence and intrigue. This key, whatever it was another piece of the dangerous puzzle, a crucial element in the ongoing conflict. A legacy she now had to protect with everything she had. They moved swiftly, a small, highly armed team, their movements precise and coordinated. The old apartment building in Little Italy was a world away from the gleaming Manhattan penthouse, a stark contrast to the luxury she had become accustomed to. Narrow, brick-faced, with fire escapes clinging to its facade like rusted vines. It was a relic of a bygone era, a reminder of her humble beginnings. The air was thick with the scent of garlic and simmering sauce, a ghost of her childhood, the familiar aroma of her Nona Canetta's cooking. Isabella felt a pang of nostalgia, mingled with the potent sense of impending danger, the knowledge that they were walking into a potential trap. They reached the apartment, dusty and long abandoned, but still bearing the faint scent of Nona Canetta's cooking, a lingering reminder of the love and warmth that had once filled those rooms. Isabella went directly to the old wooden chest, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. She ran her fingers over the intricately carved lid, tracing the familiar patterns, then lifted it open, the hinges creaking with age. Inside, nestled beneath a pile of ancient Neapolitan texts, she found it, the loose panel at the bottom, exactly where she remembered it. She pried it open, and there it was. Not a key in the traditional sense, but a small, unassuming leather journal, its leather worn and cracked with age. Its cover was blank, devoid of any markings, but as Isabella opened it, she recognized her father's elegant script, filling the pages with his familiar words. It was a diary, but not just any diary. Interspersed with personal reflections, cryptic entries, and more Neapolitan proverbs were precise, detailed accounts of Giannini family secrets, not from the ledger, but from conversations her father had overheard, from hidden intelligence he had gathered independently over decades, a collection of information he had meticulously compiled. It was a personal, highly sensitive document, a final layer of protection he had woven for his daughters, a failsafe against any threat, a hidden weapon designed to protect them from harm. It detailed hidden offshore accounts, the names of corrupt officials still loyal to Giannini, and most damningly, the location of a significant cache of illicit weapons meant to destabilize the entire region, a deadly arsenal capable of unleashing chaos and destruction. It was the key to truly crippling any resurgence of the Giannini family, a strategic document that would solidify Dante's dominance for years to come, securing his position at the top of the city's underworld. Just as Isabella finished reading the first few pages, absorbing the shocking revelations contained within, a deafening explosion ripped through the building, shaking the very foundations. The walls trembled violently, dust and debris raining down around them, filling the air with a thick haze. Antonio Giannini, he had found them. He knew this was the location of the key. He wasn't after the ledger, that was merely a distraction. It was after this, the true heart of Alessandro Moretti's final secret, the journal that held the power to destroy him. The ensuing confrontation was brutal, a desperate fight for survival. Giannini's men swarmed the apartment, their faces contorted with rage and desperation, fueled by a thirst for revenge. Dante, still recovering from his injuries, fought with a savage ferocity, his movements precise and deadly, protecting Isabella with every fiber of his being. Marco and the other men formed a protective barrier around Isabella, shielding her as she clutched the journal tightly in her hands. Its contents a potent weapon in the escalating war, a source of power in the midst of chaos. In the midst of the gunfire, the splintering wood, the screams, Isabella met Dante's eyes, their gazes locking in a silent understanding. He was bleeding again, a fresh wound to his arm, but his gaze was unwavering, his determination unshaken. He was fighting for her, for the legacy, for their survival, willing to sacrifice everything to protect her. It was then, as the last vestiges of her old life were violently torn away, that Isabella made a choice, a decision that would forever alter the course of her life. It was not born of fear, but of a profound, unsettling clarity, a deep sense of purpose that emerged from the ashes of her past. Her old life, her old identity were gone, irrevocably shattered by the events of the past few weeks. But in the ruins, she found a new, dangerous purpose, a reason to fight. She was not just a pawn in this game, a victim of circumstance. She was a queen, a force to be reckoned with, and she would fight alongside her king, standing by his side as they faced the challenges ahead. The journal, her father's last gift, was her crown, the symbol of her power and her responsibility.